Yeah, I'm going to go live on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
That's done. And I'm going to record on Zoom. And we're set.
Good afternoon, UK. Good afternoon around the world. My name is Anthony Brown. I'm the co-founder of Windrush Defenders Legal Community Interest Company. I'm also chairman of the Preston, Windrush, Generation and Descendants UK. We have a lively platform called Free Talk every Tuesday evening at 8:30 p.m. GMT, which you can join us on. We're here this afternoon at the Sadaka Centre in Sheffield, Yorkshire, the UK. And we're here to begin a crusade for what we call the Windrush Act. This will be an act of Parliament that will right the wrongs done to the Windrush generation by restoring their citizenship and protecting future generations. 4 years ago, in London, there was the Commonwealth Heads of Government Summit. Queen Elizabeth II, Her Majesty, was said to be handing on more responsibilities to Prince Charles. So everything needed to be right for this Commonwealth Heads of Government Summit because of this historic occasion for Prince Charles. But in the background, there were some stories in The Guardian about people who were had been living in the UK for decades, who were losing their jobs, being put in detention, being deported. They were denied access to the NHS. And this became known as the Windrush scandal. And as more and more information came to light, the government, who was organizing this summit with all these Commonwealth heads of government, became very nervous because these were Commonwealth citizens and the treatment of them was, as the title says, scandalous. The Prime Minister at the time, Theresa May, decided that she would make an apology. And we saw on British television for the first time the Prime Minister of the UK apologizing to Commonwealth heads of government from the Caribbean about the treatment of Black citizens here in the UK. So we had the Prime Minister from Jamaica, Andrew Holness, in Downing Street, and others receiving this apology. And the Prime Minister, Theresa May, promised that they would right the wrongs done to the Windrush generation and they would pay compensation. Now, 4 years on, where are we? We were told that it wouldn't take very long to correct these issues. But 4 years on, we still have a situation where people are not getting their status restored. There are stories about long waits for compensation, 2 years, and then the levels of compensation are far lower than what was expected. So who are the Windrush generation? The Windrush generation are people who initially came from the Caribbean, but then the wider Commonwealth from well before 1948. But the date of 1948 is used as a marker because of the ship, the Empire Windrush, which landed at Tilbury Docks in London on the 22nd of June, 1948, bringing about 1,000 people from the Caribbean, mainly Jamaica, to start new lives at the invitation of the government to help rebuild the country after the Second World War. They came to the UK as citizens of the United Kingdom and colonies, meaning they had the same rights There's people from Scotland, there's people from Wales, there's people from England to enter the United Kingdom, to live and work in the United Kingdom. But then, as the territories they came from became independent, those citizenships were taken away without notice to many of them. And then, decades on, the government passed what they call the hostile environment legislation, which mainly was the 2014 Immigration Act, which required people to produce documents to prove they had legal status in the United Kingdom. Now, the Windrush generation, who had come as citizens, had their citizenship taken away. They were then subjected to immigration law, which said they had indefinite leave to remain, but they were never given any documents to say that they had indefinite leave to remain. And then, without making any provisions, the government required them to produce documents which they were never given. And it also required them to prove that they'd been here for each year that they said they were here. And nobody had any documents from 50, 60 years ago. And so what happened was many of these people, some elderly, were being put into detention and then deported. And the government says that they checked the records and found that 164 people had been illegally deported to Jamaica since 2002. We don't know how many were deported prior to that, but we can see that this was a very traumatic and scandalous exercise in British history. So we're here today to give information about how people can sort out their status. We have a number of organizations from around the country who have been working voluntarily to help people because they are members of our communities, they are our friends, they are sometimes our own families. I myself was subjected to immigration law. I come here as a child to join my parents in 67 from Jamaica. And like many other people who come before 1962, my dad came here as a citizen of the United Kingdom and colonies, but his citizenship was taken away when Jamaica got its independence. And so he was living here as a second-class citizen after 1962 because he didn't have the same rights as his neighbors, which before 1962 he did. Unbeknown to him and me, that also affected me. And so even though I grew up here, went to school here, because my dad took me back to Jamaica in 1973, when I came back again and wanted to go to university, the Home Office told me that I was an illegal immigrant. And because I'd been out of the country for more than 2 years, I needed to report to Manchester Airport to be deported. Of course, that was a shock. Frightened, thought I'd never see my loved ones again. But the community rallied and made an anti-deportation campaign, wrote letters, signed petitions, went on marches, and stood up for me. And eventually, Margaret Thatcher, who was the Prime Minister at the time, said, who had come to power saying that we were being swamped by immigrants, decided that I could have indefinite leave to remain. But I too was not given any documents to confirm this. The episode left a mark because I had for a long time a feeling of not belonging, which many people do experience. So when the Windrush scandal broke, I had just completed a law degree, which I'd wanted to do when I wanted to go to university, but didn't, and decided to use my skills to assist people who were suffering as I'd suffered back in the 80s. And we formed a group called Windrush Defenders Legal. And we've been working with people in a surgery each week to help them get documents to restore their legal status and to claim compensation. We have been working with the Home Office to try to show them where the scheme could be improved. But although the Home Office listened in the meetings, for us, they weren't hearing because we didn't see any action in response to what we'd said to them. So it was decided through Preston Windrush Generations and Descendants that we would collect some funds and we would pay a barrister to draft a letter before action. And we decided to take the Home Office to court. The judgment for that was handed down this year in March. And the judge felt that we had a meaningful case, but because of the rules of judicial review, in asking for the Windrush generation to have the right to register as British citizens, it meant that the court would be going beyond the powers of judicial review because they would be overturning primary legislation. And the judge told us that that was a matter for Parliament. So this is the reason why we're now saying that Parliament must act and right the wrongs that have been done to the Windrush generation by creating new legislation to allow people to register rather than naturalize, because the Home Secretary is saying that the Windrush generation are British in all but legal status. If they are British, how can they be naturalized? You only naturalized foreigners. So there's some irrationality there. And we feel that this can be addressed by an act of Parliament that restores the status that people had when they came from the Caribbean, and also restore that status to their descendants and protect future generations. So this afternoon, we will hear from a number of people who have been involved in the work to assist people with their status. And I would now like to ask Jerome if he will now give us a talk on the work that he has been doing. We started a group called Channels, which is a group of young people, and they began a conference called Burning Work. And Jerome will now come and tell us more about Burning Work and what it's led him to do and the current work that he's doing. Jerome.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah? Well, I see Tanika there saying, yep. Okay, great. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here up in Sheffield for the first time, to see that so many people online on a really important day. And thank you, Anthony, for... Am I on mute? Can you hear me? You can hear me. Okay, great. And thank you, Anthony, for really giving us that history of the Windrush generation, about how they came to this country, about how successive immigration laws failed, citizens who, in the 60s, when they were coming here, it was like traveling from, I love this quote, it was like traveling from Liverpool to Manchester. That's how easy it was to travel. And then successive immigration laws by both political parties in the UK, Labour and the Conservatives, just slowly, restricted their rights, so that, and by 2014, 2016, we've had 60 years of legislation which was, aimed at, or as they would say, racialized persons really, and just limiting their access to basic rights and the basic right of entry, whilst at the same time, making sure that people from the new Commonwealth still enjoyed those rights. So it was very much race oriented, and that's present, from the 1962 Act, the 1968 Immigration Act, and 1971 Immigration Act, and slowly but surely losing rights. I think that's an important theme what Anthony picked up on is, this idea of protection, and the protection was completely lost. And I think that's just in the complete theme of immigration law in the UK. The first immigration law here, 1905 Aliens Act, was aimed at, limiting the rights of Jewish people to come into the country. 1914 Act was then targeted at German people coming over. And so this is very much what we have to deal with in the UK is this complete fear of the other. So, and that brings us to 2014, 2016, when, the rights were lost again, people detained, deported, losing jobs. And then we get to 2018, and then what Anthony was talking about there, myself, I personally got involved. Was going to a meeting incredible people who wanted to become, part of the work, and really getting involved there. So we set up a research organization called Channels, and we were working with community groups. We put on a really good event in 2020, 2 years ago, trying to get a lot of groups together to talk about the issues. So I really just wanted to make 3 points really about, firstly, Windrush, secondly, the idea of burning work, and then thirdly, just to touch on the work that I'm currently doing. So I think with regards to Windrush, and it's really spelt out in the lessons learned review, we have a scheme that's slow, it's giving out crumbs, it's not independent, it's not working on the recommendations that have been given out. And I think that those recommendations are actually really important. Those recommendations are really important areas that we can work as a community to work around. So that's the kind of idea that we took for Channels and burning work, was one of the recommendations about the idea of institutional memory, and how there was a lack of institutional memory, of understanding how people came to the country. And I know there's universities who are working on this, but we felt the importance of the archive was really important to work on. So that's what we did with burning work. And it's the idea of an active archive, and how can we, document what's going on and use that to help the community in any way. So whether it's videos, whether it's media articles, whether it's photos, how do we tie this all in together? So that's the idea of burning work. This is all part of it really, of the burning work on those 5 themes: health, education, criminal justice, immigration, and community. How can we work on protecting, the community? And then, one theme that I wanted to pick up on was with regards to the work that I do. So I work at Lead in the immigration and asylum team there, and mainly work on deportation and asylum cases. And it's just completely harrowing with regards to deportations. What is done to the community, what is done to people who would have been eligible to be British. And the UK state will say that it doesn't matter if you've come to the country at 2, at 3, at 4 years old. Once you've committed the crime, that's over 12-month sentence. It's in the public interest. It's in the public interest that you are deported to a country that you don't know at all. And this is legislation that we deal with. This is Labour legislation from 2007, and it's completely irrational, and it's completely out of step with even what we have in Europe. you know, in the European Union, you look at someone as a threat it is a threat. In the UK, we have this automatic provision. And, you know, it's tens of hundreds of people, a lot of people from the Caribbean. We've seen these Jamaican charter flights. And that's what they're doing. They're going into prisons, they're getting people ready for, you know, for deportation. I think it's really important that we stand against these flights, and that Caribbean governments also stand against these flights, because they're completely immoral. And how do we look at the legislation? How can we change that legislation to make it more humane? You know, I don't think that we should have deportations at all, but, you know, until we get there, how can we have a system that's better? So deportation, I think that comes into coming back to burning work with regards to criminality and the criminal justice system. Because if you look at youth offending, if you look at people referral units in the UK, they're full of Black and brown children who are excluded from school. They're sent to these, you know, special educational needs schools, completely put out of education. You know, this was happening back in the 60s with the subnormal. It was happening to people classes, you know, educationally subnormal, and it's still happening today. And I think really the words of Diane Abbott ring really true here when she said, you know, when you exclude someone, you might as well give them their first day in prison, because if you look at the people who are in prison in these referral units, the majority would have been excluded. If you look at it from, you know, and the same with regards to, you know, female prisons as well, that it's something like 90-95% have been in the care system, you know. So how can we start looking at that? And then from a race perspective, the majority will be, you know, Black and brown people. So I think we need to, with the burning work, with, you know, the Windrush Act, in tackling these disparities, needs to come very early on. So I think education is really important, because education and the criminal justice system are so intertwined, and these people need to be kept in school. I mean, a number of the clients I've worked with are incredibly intelligent, and the sentencing, you know, something might have happened during the London riots, for example, and you get a 3-year sentence, and all of a sudden you need to be deported. You know, it's completely immoral. So I just wanted to make that point about education and criminal justice, and making sure that we're strong in linking them. The other area of work that I do is asylum, which a very political area. I'm sure everyone would have seen the ideas for a Rwanda offshoring that the government have proposed. And I think, you know, it's clear at this point we're just living in a dystopia, really. But it's also important, you know, to remember that back in, I think it was the 60s, when the Windrush, you know, the first boat was coming, that it was proposed that, I think it was a number of MPs proposed that they should be processed offshore. So this isn't something new. This is something that's come back around and say this isn't our problem. So I think that as we see these fights in the asylum sector as well, that we come together, you know, as a Caribbean community, and that we, you know, asylum seekers, if they're from Afghanistan, if they're from Pakistan, if they're from Iran, that, you know, we stand in solidarity and that we organize with them and look for the kind of justice that we want from the immigration system, because we'll be much stronger together at the end of the day. So I think making those links are really important in the asylum sector. Especially in the, you know, in the European context, where there's such a differential treatment, you know, between types of asylum seekers. In Turkey, for example, you have about 3.6 million Syrian refugees, and they don't get the same rights that refugees from, it's called the Council of Europe, they don't get the same rights that refugees, you know, from European, more white countries will get. You know, this is in Turkey, so you've got 3.6 million people with secondary rights. You know, so I think making those kind of demands in the asylum, in the immigration sector, also can link to burning work in terms of immigration. So those are the 2 points I really wanted to make in in terms of deportation. How can we link this into education, into criminal justice, and also with regards to what's going on in the asylum sector, in what we see from this government? How can we make sure that we're working with these asylum groups, that we're working with the migrant organizations, and that we face this attack as a community, but we have to stand together with other groups, with Afghan groups, with Iraqi groups, with Pakistan groups, because we'll be much stronger. And then we make sure when we're doing this work that we archive it, that we share it, and that's all part of the burning work. So that would be my first contribution really to today. I'm not sure if we're going to do question and answer, or how we're going to keep this discussion going, but really looking forward to hearing what everyone has to say, really. Yeah.
Thank you, Jerome. We will be doing questions and answer, but we'll be doing that a little later on. We will be having a break around about 5:30.
We don't do the same.
But now we want to introduce Tanika Stevenson, who is a law graduate and is trying to be a barrister. And Tanika has founded, with myself, the Windrush Pioneers Network. We have a number of organizations, as I was saying earlier, who have risen up around the country to address the wrongs that have been done to the Windrush generation. And they have a wide range of skills, not just legal skills, but also to deal with people who are vulnerable. And when people present, they have a range of issues that we find, and through the network, we are able to identify someone who will be able to help. So Tanika will now tell us a little bit more about Windrush Pioneers Network. Tanika.
Thank you for that introduction, Anthony. Hello, everyone. For those I can see on this call. Sorry, I was reading the message that came up on the screen, but the host has spotlighted me. Thank you very much for that. As Anthony said, we launched the network last December because we found that there was a need. I was part of WD Legal CIC as a director with Anthony. I've since left. And one of the things I realized during that time, or since 2019, when I got involved with the Windrush scandal and helping victims, was that more is needed. And as a grassroots or civil society grassroots organization, which is what we were and others are, we don't have the resources to do the work that we are doing. We're doing it on a voluntary basis, on our own time. And that's fine, because we've identified there's a need and we want to give back and we want to help. So having said that, we decided that we need a network to facilitate cooperation, to facilitate navigation of the hostile environment, of the system in the UK. People or victims is really a really harsh word, and a lot of people may find offensive, so I'm trying to search for an alternative, are located all over the country, both in the UK and internationally. As Anthony and Jerome mentioned, some may come from the Caribbean, but African people are too affected. Unfortunately, the support system offered by the government, the Home Office, has been very poor to date. They say, for example, they're not going to have any more deportation flights, and within months, if that long, deportation flights were still taking off. The aim of the network is to bring all the groups together as a result and share information collegially to facilitate effective I apologize for that on behalf of Anthony. It seems as though we have a Zoom bomber, I think they're called. And so we want to do more, what the government isn't doing. One of my colleagues and one member of the network is on the call here with me, Soji Aros. I will pass over to him shortly, and he will tell you about what his organization does and how, as part of the network, it lends itself to helping people who would have been affected, and even those after we would have helped them to rectify their status and or claim compensation as a result. I won't take much more of the time. Soj, if I may hand over to you.
Thank you very much. I won't take time as well. Thank you for that introduction. I'm just going to quickly say about where we mentioned vulnerability, it transcends gender, it transcends culture, it transcends whoever we're talking about. I quite appreciate people who have been kind of been deprived in some ways at some point. Yeah, will be in the eyes of the law, term that's been honorable. But in by the way, my name is Soji and I work for Care for All 24. We care company, and then we went into health and social care. We support young ones and young adults. We support old and vulnerable as well. So that's what we do. So I was just mentioning the issue of vulnerability, which means you are kind of exposed to harm. You are exposed to being hurt. You are at the mercy of some people, even though you are not supposed to sleep. And situations like that do happen. Class as could be an adult.
Don't you worry, I got cookies in that.
Yeah, man, come on up.
If it's an adult, then we're looking at anybody from 6, 17 upward, and then that goes to whatever age they may be. If we want to go into full details of it, it's going to be a whole 2 days lecture, but I wouldn't want us to do that. So I'll just pick 3 points. Say unemployment, homelessness, mental health, and other things can be termed as being exposed to evil. I mean, evils of being deprived. If you're unemployed, you are at risk of being trafficked. You are the risk of being enslaved. You are the risk. I mean, the laws are there, Murder, Enslavement Act, and the rest. But if you are unemployed, you are unemployed. If you've got mental health issues, you have issues which need more support than other people. People can take advantage of you as well. If you are classed as being homeless, that's if you sleep right as I'm speaking now on the road. But technically, you don't have to be on the road to be homeless, if you know what I mean. So most of the time, these are the things we can come in and do. How can we do it? Can we get a house for everybody? Like Seneca said, maybe not. But in terms of
interrupt, would it be okay if you let Hagrid in?
So in terms of referral to the appropriate council, depending on where you live, depending on the council where you are, for homeless referrals now, where we live in the northwest of England, it could be as long as 6 weeks, depending. Meanwhile, if you just cross this place to Cheshire, you'll find another different ball game entirely. So these are the places we can channel referrals to. And we can be a kind of timely advice to somebody that is seriously in need. Talking about mental health, I don't want to break all of that down as well. I just want to mention the part which I have seen worked a lot, which is the place of getting counseling. It could be trauma counseling. It could be bereavement counseling. Whatever counseling it would be. At the moment, the waiting time, I think it was, I can't remember who spoke earlier, and was mentioning how it could be different. People can be treated differently. While we cannot justify that, what we can say is that if the wait time in my region is longer than the wait time to somebody in another region, many factors can be responsible for that. So how can we help? Let us know what you need, and let us know how you can be referred to a place where the waiting line is not that more. In that case, we can see ourselves being on the same page. Last thing I'm going to mention is recruitment. Okay, now you can stay. Now you don't have to go. What do you do? Now you've got a criminal record. How do you get into work? Now you've got all this. How does this work? Agreed. You may not get deported, but so what are you going to be doing? Nothing. So you need to get a job. And in that's how we can come in again and see how we can help. Because initially, like I said, we started as a recruitment business. So all of this come into play, and we're looking at the total wellness of men. That's why we call it Care for All. It's for all. It's for the young. It's for the old. So if you just go on our website, company website, it's www.careforalltd.co.uk. It's a Liverpool one, based in Liverpool. I know there are a lot of Care for Us around, but ours is the one there based in. I'll stay on. So I'll see if any question comes in. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Suj. And if I would just offer a closing note from Suj. Like Suj, we seek strategic partners who will help facilitate and offer services, or at least signpost the services that the authorities would not be able to. With regards to the waiting time for certain medical services, I'm only going to point this out because it was in the news recently, where the Welsh minister, I believe, or one of the representatives for the health department was saying that they're trying to get waiting time down from 2 years to 1 year, and that the minister should hold them to that. If anybody who live in England knows, the waiting time for certain medical procedures is long, and it's a problem. But not only that, if you do have a problem, you don't know where to go, you can't get onto your GPs and stuff like that. So that's another reason why the network has been created and is fundamental. And we're hoping to be there for everyone and anyone. So instead of having to try to find a local service offering assistance with regards to Windrush or anything else, because Windrush is just one issue that you may be facing. There may be several others, as was pointed out so far on this Zoom call. Then you can come to the network, and we will do the legwork for you and signpost you and find the best advice, help, and care you may need. And it's for free. That's what we're about. We're not a for-profit organization. We're not registered as yet, but we will be. It will be a CIC, which means community interest company, serving the community, being for the members of the community. Thank you, Anthony. Thanks, Suj. You're muted, Anthony.
Anthony, you're muted, mate.
Please don't unmute the laptop. We'll unmute the.
Okay.
Unmute the mic.
Can you hear me now? Yeah. So thank you, Tanika. We're going to be growing the network.
Can you move a little bit to your left, please, Anthony?
Yeah, we're going to be growing the network.
Anthony, I think you're still muted, mate.
Yeah. Okay.
He needs to be muted in front of him because it's different, using a different mic. Thanks, everyone.
Okay. So thank you, Tanika. We're going to be growing the network to have different services and to assist people to develop in terms of their advocacy. We have other groups within the network which are assisting people with regards to their Windrush status and other status, but also looking at how the community itself can be supported through difficult times. And we now have Glenda Andrew, who's going to tell us about the work that she's been doing with Preston Windrush Generations and Descendants, which was co-founded with Sakina Muncie. She'll tell us a little bit about Sakina as well. Glenda.
Oh, hi everyone. Okay, yes, my name's Glenda Andrew, and we started Preston Windrush Generation and Descendants UK back in 2019, if I'm not mistaken, and it came about because number one, I helped my mum with her status application. Of course, I didn't know anything about Windrush in those days. And then, of course, a few days later, after my mum received her naturalization certificate, I got a call from Sakina. Sakina, who was born here and was told that she wasn't British when she was applying for her daughter's passport. A long time since then, we have worked and collaborated with many organisations across the UK in supporting people who have been impacted by the Windrush scandal, lost their job or have been locked out of the country, finding it difficult in so many different ways. As an advocate, we support people from all issues, whether it's mental health, whether it's problems with housing, work, just someone to speak to at the other end of the phone. Through COVID, we began the Windrush community response, where we found that COVID is sort of a loneliness, not illness, but a loneliness situation like those for the Windrush generation and many of the descendants who have been locked out. So we started a Windrush community response where we provided traditional Caribbean style food for our seniors and of course the wider communities, and then of course for those that are vulnerable. And it went viral really, and it's all been done by donations from the community, ourselves. We have a brilliant team with Dave Williams, our Silver Afro, and Diane Proctor, a fantastic cook, and many other volunteers who deliver those meals on a Friday that can help them for the weekend. Of course, we're not doing it at the moment because we've been getting involved with the Windrush Act Crusade, but it's something that we're going to be starting again in May. So again, the Windrush work has developed, and I think it's something that we realised early on, that it wasn't just about those that had been impacted, but it was about a work that we needed to do in sort of galvanising all these different organisations, the people, but never forgetting those people who really need our help. That's why I'm happy to be part of this fundraiser, where we can raise money as well to support the Windrush Act Crusade, which is all about giving those people their citizenship back. Because at the end of the day, it's wrong. And if it can happen in 2021, 2018, 1988, it's going to happen in the future. And we've got to protect our children and our grandchildren. What else can I say? Besides what I do, I'm part of another network, which is the Windrush National Organisation. And also because of COVID, we started a free talk, which is a Windrush conference online every week. And that is a safe place for anyone who wants to be involved or find out how they can support people in their area, whether it's in Blackpool, London, wherever you are, how we can help people and how people who are impacted can join with others and meet others and feel that they're not alone. I think it's something that's really needed. And there's a lot of people out there that's not Windrush and they need support as well. So it's about how can we change that, not just for those people that have been impacted, but those organisations and lawyers and solicitors, those advocacy groups that can support all those other groups as well. So we all do it because we've got a passion, and it's something that I believe my parent gave it to me. You know, if my parent didn't come here, I won't be here today, and I won't be doing what I'm doing now. Is there anything that you would like to ask? I know I was talking 20 minutes, but I could go on a bit longer. But there is so much I want to say, and I just want to say thank you to everybody who's joined us today. We're here in Sheffield. I I've had a brilliant opportunity to travel up and down the country and to do lots of events. But again, we really want to know if you've been impacted in any way by Windrush, if you're here in the UK, if you're abroad, whether you're in Dominica, I've just been told, please go to our website. That is how we can help you. We have a questionnaire on there. It's www.prestonwindrush.co.uk. There's a questionnaire. Once you fill in that questionnaire briefly as you can, we'll be in touch with you. And usually what we'll do is we will forward it on to an advocate, someone like myself or Sakina. And then if we can't help you, of course, we've got other network groups or organizations like WD Legal and the Windrush National Pioneers and the Windrush National Organization. So again, there's a large network. And also, don't forget, also you've got the Windrush at Crusade. They've got their own website and their email is the Windrush Act Crusade. No, the Windrush Act at wdlegal.co.uk. I got it right. Is that it? I think that is it. I'm sure we'll get to ask some questions or answer some questions later. I like your smiling, Tanika.
Thank you, thank you, Glenda. So yes, so that's our great Glenda, who has done so much work in the community in Preston and across the UK and in Parliament and at the Home Office. She's been everywhere to try to get justice for the Windrush generation and descendants. But there is a historical background to all of this. And a part of what the network wants to do is to educate everyone, particularly the Home Office, about the history of people from the Windrush generation, to help them when they are making decisions that they take into consideration contributions that has been made to this country by the Windrush generation. And we now have Dr. Juanita Cox, who's going to take us through some of that history that she has researched, and to hear some of the testimonies of some of the people who she's been interviewing. So over to Dr. Cox.
So thank you for that welcome, Anthony. It's a great pleasure to be here with you. I am going to start, let me just get my slides sorted out. So I'm working on what's called the Windrush scandal in its transnational and Commonwealth context. It's essentially a 3-year Arts and Humanities Research Council funded project. And the idea is basically to trace various strands of the Windrush scandal in its longer historical context. So I think at the moment, a lot of people kind of focus around 2000, maybe 5, 6, 7 onwards. Or in fact, from David Cameron and Theresa May's hostile environment from 2010 onwards. But we're sort of looking at the experience right across the board. But before I start that, I just want to say, so I work at the Institute of Commonwealth Studies, and that's part of the University of London. One of the things I'm very conscious of is that what we're essentially trying to do is to contribute to the work that's already being done by researchers outside of the academy, by various campaigners, community groups, historians, people who've basically been active in this field for decades. The primary reason I'm really interested in the project itself is because I want to ensure that the experiences and the perspectives of the Windrush generation and their descendants and their advocates are all given voice within higher education, and also to make sure that through oral history, we have a proper resource from those perspectives, from the perspectives of the Black community. The other thing that we are really trying to drive through as well, that these resources will be invaluable for academics in terms of people who are looking to decolonize the curriculum of their institutions. So as I think I've mentioned before in previous talks, I'm from a group of historians. We're not lawyers, so although I know a lot about the law, it's extremely complex, and I wouldn't pretend that I'm by any way an expert. Also, my role is to be a researcher. So the actual experts are really the people living in the community. I'm coming to the community to find out what the experiences are in order to make sure that those voices are heard within higher education. So one of the things the project's going to do, and I don't want to stay too long on what we're doing, because I'm more keen to get the talk about the history, but just so that people are aware, we are aiming to do roughly 60 major interviews, hopefully more, that will be based on interviewing Caribbean politicians and diplomats, trying to get an understanding of the relationship between various territories and Britain. So for example, Jamaica, why does Jamaica accept deportees in the first place? Essentially, if somebody here is born and brought up here and committed a crime, why on earth would Jamaica want to be accepting people? Fair enough, they've got Jamaican heritage, but essentially it's a British problem. So we're interested in finding out things like that. We're also interested in the relationship between politicians and diplomats and how they work with heritage communities within the UK to actually help the community move forward. And the other set of interviews we're looking at is trying to focus a lot on resistance and resilience of the community. So of course, we're very aware that a lot of people have been affected, in terms of their mental health, in terms of their finances, in terms of their general well-being by the hostile environment. And we know there are lots of people around the country doing amazing work on that. Our primary interest is in looking at the community activists and people like trade unionists, lawyers, MPs, church leaders, and recording their stories and getting a clear idea of how the Black communities actually come together to help itself, and also to kind of break that narrative that the Black community is disjointed. It clearly isn't, because this would never have reached the political agenda if it hadn't been for the voices of people within the community. The other thing that I just wanted to point out is that we will be having a dedicated website that will have information all about the Windrush. And we're going to be looking at government archives, all sorts of material, which we hope by putting onto our website will help activists in their work. And then also ultimately, based on the oral history research that we're doing, we hope that we'll be able to produce a monograph that can be used as part of the training for the Home Office, that can feed into policy. But also, I just wanted to point out as well that we're looking at taking some of those oral history recordings and trying to get them into the kind of GCSEs. Yeah, so you'll see on here, there's a module called Migration to Britain. And yeah, so we're looking at doing dedicated handouts, podcasts, things like that to help with decolonizing the curriculum, as I mentioned, and lots of other things. We'll be speaking to high commissioners and all sorts of different people and doing roadshows across the country. And then finally, the other thing is that we want to produce a kind of database that allows people to like a searchable catalog in a way, so that people can find out where all the oral history recordings are across the country. So we're currently working with the British Library and the Black Cultural Archives on that, but I'm reaching out to other organizations. And if anybody knows of any oral history recordings anywhere, it'd be really helpful if you would let me know as well. Right, so moving on swiftly, I want to now talk about the kind of the context of all of this. And because we're looking at the long history, I think one of the things that's come out very strongly from speaking to people within the community is to do with the term the Windrush generation. You know, it has its place, but at the same time, it can be slightly misleading in the sense that people think, oh, Black people turned up in 1948, there wasn't anybody here before. So that's kind of the context I want to look at now. And I just want to make it clear that people of African descent, many of you will know this already, have been in Britain since the 3rd century AD in varying numbers. The other thing I wanted to point out was that Britain and Portugal have been responsible for 70% of all Africans transported to the Americas. And essentially, when you think about people being transported from Africa to the Americas to effectively be used for economic exploitation by the West, those people are then under the British Empire and British territory, and they are British. They were British subjects. The other thing that we don't often talk about is the fact that we think of America as being worse than Britain quite often, but we should remember that slavery was actually introduced to the US by the British, and that there were 13 British colonies founded in North America in 1600. I won't list them all, but I just thought it's important to set that context. And it's also important to be aware that this isn't the whole issue of deportations, the whole narrative around that is nothing new. Even during the period of slavery, where, you know, Britain has always been very careful to ensure that there hasn't been the idea of slavery, the Britain's never, never, ever will be slaves, that kind of national song. It's always been important for Britain to kind of maintain its idea of purity on its own land. So it was worth mentioning, I think, that on the 22nd of June, 1772, another significant date, 22nd of June, 1948, just interesting there, that there was a case called Somerset versus Stuart. James Somerset was an enslaved man who belonged to a man called Charles Stuart. They moved from one of the British colonies, I think from Virginia, in North America to Britain. And during that period, Somerset heard about the abolitionists. He basically escaped from Stuart. And then when the whole thing went to court, because essentially his master was trying to deport him back to Jamaica, Lord Mansfield's ruling was that Black people cannot be deported against their will from Britain because they're British. So, this is something that's been going on for a long time. Obviously, I'm mentioning you've got 1807, the abolition of the slave trade, 1838, the abolition of slavery, and then the whole issue of enslaved people receiving nothing, or the newly emancipated people receiving nothing, but 20 million going in compensation to those who, supposedly or allegedly lost their property. And I think it's just worth mentioning this because people often say, they're talking about reparations and talking about the period of slavery. And then there's almost like this gap between slavery and now. And a lot of people say, oh, get over this whole issue of reparations. Oh, that was so long ago. Well, it's obviously not as simple as that, because you've got from 1838 to 1917, a period of indentureship where people were essentially kept in extremely similar conditions to slavery. But in those instances, whether it was in the case of Guyana and Trinidad, but also Jamaica and other territories, Grenada, it was indentured Indians, people of Chinese heritage, Portuguese heritage. And then when you say, okay, got to the end of indentureship, what happened then? Well, then obviously you're looking then from until the mid 20th century, Caribbean territories still remaining extremely exploited. But nevertheless, all of this is going on. The point is that during this hugely long period of history, all of these people originally from Africa were then considered to be British subjects. If you were born on British territory, you were given the status of a British subject. So, and I think Jerome mentioned earlier the British Nationality and Status of Aliens Act. I just wanted to mention it again because actually this is one of the acts that formalized common law, saying that anyone who was born in the UK or in one of its colonies was British. So this is before the 1948 Nationality Act. I think a lot of people refer to the 1948 Nationality Act as though that's what made people from Caribbean territories British. But again, as I said before, they were British long before that. I'm bringing up the issue of emigration instead of immigration because we're constantly hearing these kind of negative narratives about immigration from people coming outside of outside of British borders into Britain. But I think it's very important to recognize and remember that the nationality laws we have today are actually a consequence of the emigration state, if you like, of Britain. So in every decade between 1850 and 1980, with the exception of the 1930s, the UK actually experienced net migration year on year. And so migration from Britain to the Commonwealth actually transformed the UK state and its boundaries. And essentially, you're looking at this kind of imperialist policy that connects the metropolitan core, Britain, to settler peripheries, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, South Africa. And so it's kind of a form of state subsidized emigration, which was formalized in the 1922 Empire Settlement Act. And it was really about Britain kind of making sure that it was strengthening its the military advantages it had, its trade advantages, and also its cultural advantage in terms of language and in terms of making sure that the global world spoke in English, I guess. And so for proponents of the idea of Greater Britain, their hope was that Canada and Australia and other territories would be to us, this is actually a historian at the time talking, said would be to us as Kent and Cornwall. They might be geographically distant, but essentially, Greater Britain is what would be going on outside of the metropolitan centre. And as a part of this process, I think one of the things we also need to be aware of is that you've got the period of slavery, but really pseudoscientific race ideologies start getting stronger and stronger after slavery. It's a really important way of the West kind of securing again their notions of superiority, and then that kind of paternalistic way of kind of going into countries and imperialistically taking over. And so as part of that process, you'll find that the Australians and Canadians also started thinking of themselves as superior stock. And, even if you think of Darwin talks about how the lower races were destined to die out. So there's this real kind of sense of eugenics and racial territorialism that is going on. Having said all of that, I just want to then sort of look at what's going on in terms of the Black community and how their sense of identity and how they're being kind of, I guess, educated to identify themselves. So this goes back to 1896, again, just to reaffirm the fact that people were British long before 1948, where you have a British Guyanese merchant seaman in 1896, where he expresses the following. He says, he felt British. He was descended from slaves taken from West Africa, but English was his first language. His school books were written by British people. He lived under British law. He was brought up to admire British poets and British musicians and British scientists and politicians and nobility. And, his allegiance was to King George V, to the mother country, to British people all over the world. And again, emphasizing this idea of being British all over the world. And then meanwhile, just to take the opposite perspective, we've got a British politician operating in around the same kind of period. Between he was born in 1879, died in 1962, and he makes a very important observation that in every school in our colonies, the natives are taught, first of all, allegiance to the king, and secondly, and perhaps primarily, they are taught that they are British subjects and that they owe this allegiance. I just thought I would mention, because we have the Commonwealth Games happening this year in Birmingham, and I guess it's in July, it's coming up soon. But that the first British Empire Games was held, and that's what the Commonwealth Games was called in 1930, that was held with participants from, I think, about 11 territories, including British Guyana. I think that was the only Caribbean territory at the time. But the whole point of it, and the whole aim of it, was supposedly to increase goodwill and understanding within the empire. And that was the kind of objectives. And I just think it's interesting to mention that, because is that still what the Commonwealth is about? Is that still what Britain is has as its aim for all of the Commonwealth countries? But again, to just mention that the forerunner to these British Empire Games was the 1911 Inter-Empire Sports Championships. And just to emphasize this racialized way of looking at the world, that particular championship was aimed at pan-white settler unity. And so, the Commonwealth Games emerges out of this focus on Western superiority, white superiority. Sorry, I should have just put them all like that. Okay, and so obviously I don't need to say anything about the 1948 Immigration Act, apart from to say there were no immigration restrictions for anyone from who were citizens of the UK and colonies or other Commonwealth citizens. I think Anthony and Jerome have kind of covered that kind of territory. Just in terms of the project that I'm working on, one of the things that concerns us is this term Windrush. So I've been speaking to a lot of the elders in the community, and it's clearly kind of problematic. On the one hand, the Empire Windrush docked in Tilbury on the 21st of June. People disembarked on the 22nd. And it was a term that was coined by Sam King, who himself came on that ship. But at the same time, why then? Why that particular moment? We see that people were involved in the Second World War, were involved in the First World War, have lived in Britain for decades long before then. But also, if you want to think of it in terms of ships and people coming back from the Caribbean, there was an earlier ship that came from the Caribbean to the UK on the 21st of December 1947, again, mostly ex-service personnel, and it was the steamship Almanzora. So yeah, I mean, it's something we're thinking about. We certainly have to acknowledge in our research that it's not a term everyone is comfortable with. The other thing I just wanted to mention as well, that when we're thinking of the Commonwealth and the fact that, people who are moving to Britain in this period feel very British. 1952 is the year that Queen Elizabeth II becomes head of the Commonwealth. And it's just interesting as well, in light of the response of Prince William and Kate Middleton on their most recent trip to the Caribbean to mark 70 years of Queen Elizabeth's ascension to the throne. I'm going to skip past this very quickly. This was just another quote to emphasize just how British people still felt. 1954, this gentleman, Walter Lothan, saying people did think England was the mother country. When I came here, I didn't have a status as a Jamaican. I was British and going to the mother country. And he says, interestingly, it was like going from one parish to another. And even in some of the oral history interviews I've been doing, people make the same case. It's exactly the same thing. They didn't see there was any difference. So I'm stopping here to just refer to other parliamentary voices. It's important to realize that whilst a lot of the structures in place are racist, I mean, I'll tell you my opinions as we go along, but I just want to make it clear that there are people within the government who recognized that they have a duty to the Caribbean, and that the Caribbean so let me just read what's said. So we've got here Mr. Dryburgh, who was MP for Malden, and he was speaking in the House of Commons on the 4th of February, 1949. And he points out that, the most profound and burning problem of the 20th century was going to be the relationship between the white peoples of the world and the colored peoples, many of whom are now waking for the first time to racial and national consciousness. And he goes on to say, the advertising brochures describe Jamaica as a tropical paradise. Indeed, its natural endowments are matchless in their beauty. However, in many of its aspects, it would be truer to describe it as a tropical slum. Now, he then goes importantly on to say, for that, our forefathers and some of our predecessors have a heavy blame to bear. And I think it's really important in terms of the Home Office, that the Home Office is aware of all of this, the long history, and aware that, they have a huge responsibility to the Windrush generation because of the long history. Again, thinking later on to 1962, when we have Jamaica's the first Caribbean territory to become independent. I think Jamaica's the first one. And Lord Henry Moulston says, I think we should remember when dealing with this island and this area, some of the less good things which have happened there while it has been a responsibility of this country. The exploitation which took place there, the wealth which was produced in those islands, in Jamaica in particular, and which was not allowed to remain there, but came over to this country where it was spent instead of being used and reinvested there. And of course, the slavery, which for so long was the basis of the economy of Jamaica. My lords, I'm mentioning these things not simply for the sake of recrimination, but because I think it puts these matters into proportion, which we should bear in mind when we're thinking of the future. These are the kinds of things that I think have long been forgotten by the government and need to be remembered when we're thinking also about issues of reparations, but also in terms of what Anthony was talking about in terms of his campaign with the Windrush Crusade Act. And then the other thing I just wanted to put into context, we quite often talk about Enoch Powell, and I think Enoch Powell, as racist as he is, he's actually always used just as a scapegoat. In my opinion, and I may be wrong, I feel that every prime minister that basically has been in power pretty much up into the 70s and beyond, has wanted to keep England white. We see that when the Empire Windrush was heading towards Britain, there's mass panic in the government. The Labour Prime Minister at the time, Clement Attlee, had to be persuaded against diverting the ship to East Africa. His idea was that the boat could be diverted for people to go off and pick peanuts. And then he's told, well, hang on a minute, you've had this great idea about the Commonwealth, and if people within the Commonwealth would realize you're racist, then that's going to be very problematic. Okay, so they forget about it. And then meanwhile, he's reassured, don't worry, because they won't last one winter. And then when we look later at Winston Churchill, and he was Prime Minister, of course, during the war period, but then again in 1951 to 1955, he was so obsessed with the number of colored people of color working who were employed by the post office that he actually wanted to fight his election campaign on the election campaign on the slogan to keep England white. And again, because of the Commonwealth and their reliance on trade and their reliance, the economic benefits that they were getting from their connections to the Commonwealth, nobody wanted to upset the apple cart. What we have instead, however, is ministers in the 1950s commissioning researchers to come up with reasons for concluding that non-white immigration is problematic. And you have senior civil servants instructing dole officers to conduct secret race surveys to see if there's any truth to the assumption that migrants were coming to live off the welfare state. You know, they were getting police chiefs around the country to ask leading questions such as, is it true that Black people are generally idle? Do they have low standards of living? Are they addicted to drug trafficking and other sorts of crimes? Actually, the research that was commissioned at the time ended up being utterly useless to them because people weren't if they were committing less crimes than Indigenous people were committing, and so yeah, it was just pointless and it didn't help, which is why they then start moving into the issue of enacting various immigration laws, starting with the 1962 Immigration Act and all of those that were designed to limit and eventually halt the number of Black people entering the UK as members of the Commonwealth. So I'm just going to go to the next page. Yeah, so I just wanted to give you an idea of some of the recordings that we've done. One of the things I wanted to kind of just show from what I found out, as I say, other people have done research and found out this information before me, and what I'm trying to do is corroborate a lot of material. So I believe it was the Phillips brothers who had interviewed Sam King, although Sam King, of course, did a lot of his own writing and work. But I know that when he first returned to Jamaica from Britain after the war, he noted that in order to get papers to get back on the SS Empire Windrush in 1948 and return to Britain, he actually had to get papers to leave. And the Justice of the Peace had to sign to say that, you know, he was a responsible citizen, and the police had to sign to say that he wasn't a troublemaker. And I think in this context, it's worth mentioning that going back to this idea of pseudoscientific racism and almost eugenics in a sense, because this is a period when people are thinking about good human stock. And when we think about some of the criteria now, if you're applying for British citizenship, there's always this clause about good character. All of these things kind of have emerged out of this earlier period of history. So this recording here is from somebody of Indo-Guyanese background. He was born in Georgetown, and he also noticed that he needed police clearance. So what I wanted to do was get a sense of, was this a Caribbean-wide issue, or was it just Jamaica? Like, what were the difference between the islands? And because in terms of legislation, there are differences. So yeah, that was kind of my starting point. So I'm just going to share this recording with you. There's a slight gap in between, but if you hear a silence for a little bit, don't worry, it is going to carry on playing. So I'll play it now. Oops, that didn't work very well. Let's see.
George Mangar.
But there was one thing else that we had to do coming to England. You see, people don't realize racism is not something new, right? We had to get something called a police clearance to come to England. I have mine still. You had to go to the police headquarters. Although I was a police officer, I went to police headquarters, and with a picture and a thumbprint and everything you had to put on this thing, and you brought that to England with you, with your passport. We had to have vaccination certificates, yellow fever, smallpox, everything under the sun. You had to have all that done. Typhoid, you had all that done. And then it was always recommended that you get a letter of reference about your character. And because I came from a family that had lots of other influences and things, and we were mixed with certain people.
I'm just going to stop it there in the interest of time, and I just want to check quickly how much longer am I okay for time? Okay, so I'm going to carry on. Yeah. So, and this one, this is a recording that I did with a lady called Ailith Harewood. She'd been born in Georgetown in Guyana in the 1930s and moved to the UK in 1965 to train as a nurse. She'd actually trained as an SRN nurse, which was quite unusual at the time. Most nurses inadvertently ended up being SEN nurses, and she went back to Guyana hoping that she'd be able to get work. And then when she came back to England, she had problems. So I'm just going to play this recording. Oops, keeps doing this. Hold on.
Of returnees, I went back and only to find I was neither fish nor fowl. I'd gone back and said, can I have a job? And then you have this kind of veiled threat is you come back from England to take us over. You have become anglicized. We have to protect this anglification, if that is a word. And because I had now lost, there were also economic things. I had lost the house I left. My children were found out. I needed to pull things together. I couldn't get my person was my badge of state registration.
Okay, I'm just skipping a little bit because it's quite a long piece. So I'm just trying to get, so she goes to Guyana and this is when she's trying to get back into the UK.
So I think what may have saved me is that on my person was my
Sorry.
That when I got back to Southampton, I could not enter. So I think what may have saved me is that on my person was my badge of state registration. So I was given a 12-month stay. You may stay for 12 months. To my whatever, I still have that passport that states that you may stay.
What part? So I'm just going to pause there to explain. One of the reasons I'm interested in capturing these really early periods is because what is clear is a lot of people didn't realize that when their individual territories became independent, that even if they were in Britain, if they were living in Britain, they automatically defaulted to the citizen to being from the country that they were born in. So in the case of Ailith, even had she been living in Britain, because Guyana became independent in 1966, her citizenship status defaulted to being Guyanese, but without anyone having told her that. So she was under the illusion that she was still British, but she wasn't. So that was just that particular clip. This clip I just wanted to share with you. So one of the things I've been trying to do as well is a lot of the oral histories are very focused on the African Caribbean community. So I'm trying to capture as well voices of people who, whether they have Chinese ancestry or Indian ancestry, but from other parts of the Caribbean. So Bob Chiatau is someone who had Chinese ancestry, and this is him talking about his sense of identity. Oops. Hold on.
But in my Guyana, it was British Guyana. Yeah, I always remember you said, "Children of Ghana, you are brothers all. Children of Ghana, answer to your call. Well, let your voices mingle, lift your heads and sing, God save the old Britain, God save British King." Nothing but God save Guyana.
Yeah, so I thought this was really instructive in terms of, here you are in Guyana, and you're essentially being brought up to be entirely British. You know, he wasn't taught anything about the history of Guyana whatsoever. So then to then be told that he was no longer British was just mind-blowing. So I'm just going to play this clip here. In 1972, his mother basically is ill, and then he applies to renew his British passport and is essentially told it's no longer valid. And unfortunately, he's forced to apply for a Guyanese passport. You know, he later on registers as British, but initially he applies for a Guyanese passport. The reason I thought this was really interesting, and you'll hear this towards the end, is he was actually friends with a lot of people within government, and despite everything, he doesn't, he kind of isn't aware of the kind of race dynamics that are going on in terms of citizenship. So I'm just going to play that.
Because in 72, when my mom was ill and I had to get down to Guyana, they didn't want to give me a passport because my passport had run out then. They said almost 17 years. I'm in the passport only used to run for 5 or 10 in those days.
I think so, yeah.
And I couldn't even get to, because Sir John was here as the High Commissioner. Within 5 days, he was able to give me a Guyanese passport.
A Guyanese passport.
Yeah.
So when you went to the Home Office or the British passport
they wouldn't give you a passport.
It was Petit
France.
Petit France.
Yeah, out of St. James.
Yeah, and so they wouldn't give you a British passport. So you had to get a Guyanese
passport. And I was lucky because Sir John was the High Commissioner there, and when I talked to him, right away he, within 5 days or less than a week, I had the passport and I was able to go down to Guyana.
But given Guyana was still part of the Commonwealth, what did you think about the situation? Did you find it confusing that you couldn't have?
No, you weren't thinking about that. You know, it's not that's. I'm talking about 1972.
Yeah, but didn't you wonder how you could suddenly be stripped of your British citizenship?
No, because I never even thought we could have stripped from the British citizenship. My wife worked at Parliament, worked for the Labour Party, all those MPs. The first MP, she worked for the House. He was the Deputy Speaker of Sydney Irving, MP for Dartford. I went to his daughter's wedding. I went to the crypt downstairs at St. Stephen's entrance. There's a crypt. We had the wedding. I met Harold Wilson, all those people, lovely people, and in truth, his wife Mary was very close with my wife. Yeah.
So when you were issued with the Guyanese passport, to your mind, even though you had the Guyanese passport, you were still British anyway?
Yes, I never had any doubts about that. How it came about, because I wanted to go down to Guyana, but they wouldn't give me a passport.
Okay.
Because my passport had run out.
Yeah.
And I had no reason to get a passport because I wasn't going anywhere. I was working every day to make sure you had enough to live. Luckily, my wife is working. She was never out of a job and that sort of thing. And I was working. And we had children to bring up, so that we'd have even go on holidays. We never went on holidays.
So when you traveled back to Guyana, though,
I'm just going to stop there because it goes on for quite a long period. But I just thought it was really interesting that here was a man, Bob Chiatow, very professional background, very well educated. He did a lot of work with the high commissions. He was an architect by trade. His wife worked within Parliament. His wife was friends with Harold Wilson's wife. They were surrounded by, he actually worked with the Commission for Racial Equality. He was surrounded by a lot of different people who would have been aware of the 1971 Immigration Act and also aware that they could have registered as British. There's so many different things that I can get from this particular recording, in the sense that, instead of the Home Office letting him know he could have registered as British. They just said you're not British anymore. But actually, that was ridiculous because he was still allowed to register as British. So there's all sorts of different issues that this kind of recording brings up, and that's why, as a university, we're really interested in capturing all of these stories. This one as well is really about someone who came to Britain with her grandmother, so that she came on that passport and didn't have her own didn't have her own travel documents. And it just talks about when she first realizes that she had a problem with her citizenship status.
When I set about applying for a passport, age 22, and age 22, there was a problem that, oh, you're not British anymore. And this was quite shocking. You can't have a British passport because you're not British anymore. You're now Grenadian because Grenada has become independent.
So again, you see that all the different territories are becoming independent at different stages, and some of them are have different arrangements with the government. So some have a situation where when they become independent, you automatically default to being from the territory you were born in or your parents were from. Whereas if you look at a territory like, say, Antigua, it allowed for you to have dual heritage. So again, it's really interesting looking at the different territories to see how the law affects people differently. Anthony, I did a recording of. He spoke to you, of course, about his experience. So I'm wondering, Anthony, shall I play it? Let's play it. Okay. So you heard that Anthony was obviously born in Jamaica in the early 1960s. He moved to the UK with his mother and siblings in 67 to join his father, who'd actually already been in Britain back in the 1950s. But I think the reason I thought Anthony's story was particularly interesting is because we talk a lot about the situation with Black people in Britain, you know, whether we talk about their kind of economic status or their not doing as well academically as other ethnic groups. And I just thought here's a classic example of how citizenship laws and immigration laws have actually interrupted his chance at education at the moment in his life when he should have had it. Of course, Anthony's achieved a huge amount since then, and as you know, he's been back to university, he studied law, but really that should all have happened years before. And these are the kinds of examples we see happening over and over again, where people's life chances are kind of being held back. So this is the recording with Anthony.
And wanted to go to university, and they said that I was being treated as an overseas student. So I said, overseas student, but I'm British. So I wrote to the Home Office, and the Home Office said that, yeah, I'm an overseas student. Because I'd been out of the country for more than 2 years, I'd fallen foul of the 1971 Immigration Act. It says that if you've been out of the country for more than 2 years, you lose your right to remain. So they said I needed to report to Manchester Airport to be deported. So that's when the shock hit, and was really, really frightened. Didn't know what to do. Because while I was in Jamaica, I'd always pined to come back again. Because I missed my friends, missed my brothers, missed England. And now I was going to get deported.
Yeah, so that's also interesting because Anthony talks about having contacted the Home Office. And the last thing you expect from contacting the Home Office is that they're then going to tell you that you're being deported. Different people have had different experiences with the Home Office. Obviously, when Aleph contacted the Home Office to ask why she hadn't why she was being disbarred from coming into Britain. She was actually given 1 year leave to enter. And then when she wrote to the Home Office complaining, they said, oh, just, register as British and you'll be fine. So, you can see that in a sense, it's almost like a lottery. It depends on who you encounter at the Home Office, what period of kind of the history you're communicating with the Home Office. And it just gets increasingly harder and harder in terms of the Home Office response based on these kind of hostile environment policies. One thing that I had looked at that I thought was really interesting as well was, I'm just trying to see if I can find, maybe I can't find it. I might have to not. I was going to look at the 2-year clause for indefinite leave to remain, because I noticed recently on the Home Office website that they said that that anybody who had been outside of the UK for longer than 2 years automatically lost their indefinite leave to remain. And that's something they put up on the Home Office website just a few weeks ago. And so I just wanted to see if I could find out if that was really the case. And I looked up a document called the Home Office Returning Residence document, and then found that Anthony should never have been at risk of deportation, because it said a person who has been absent from the UK for more than 2 consecutive years will automatically lose their indefinite leave as a matter of law. The exception to this was Commonwealth citizens settled in the UK when the 1971 Immigration Act came into force on 1st January 1973. So under section 1.5, they were protected from losing their indefinite leave from absences outside of the UK until 1st August 1988, when section 1.5 was repealed. And as far as I'm gathering from the Home Office, they're kind of not accepting any of these. There's so many different complex layers to this law, but I may well be wrong. It was just something that I had noticed. Richard Black, the recording. Now, a lot of these recordings were done during lockdown, and unfortunately, the sound quality on them was not brilliant, especially for Richard Black was somebody who was based in St. Lucia. And sorry, not in St. Lucia, he was in Trinidad at the time I recorded him, and the sound wasn't very clear. But I just wanted to talk through his situation, because he had been born in St. Lucia, moved to the UK to join his parents in 1960. He'd gone through the primary and secondary school system in the UK. He became a photographer, and then in 1976 he actually married a Trinidadian. He had applied for and had been issued a new 10-year passport, British passport, in 1978. And then, because his in-laws were unwell, they decided to visit his in-laws. What he hadn't noticed, though, was that his British passport had a stamp in it on his way back that said subject to immigration control. So again, though, when he traveled out of the UK, nobody said anything to him. So that when he tried to, so that's when he traveled in 1983. If anybody had said anything to him at the time, he could have sorted out his status very easily, but nobody did. And of course, he then ended up being stuck in Trinidad, even though that's not where he was from. And he's one of the people that, we talk about people who've been locked out and who've been based overseas. And in fact, while I'm on this topic, I think it's worth mentioning that one of the aspects of our study is that we're interested in who has been locked out. In the UK at the moment, in terms of media, we find that everybody's kind of very much focused on the experiences of people who are in Britain, and their kind of the experience of how people have been affected by the hostile environment here in the UK. But obviously there are people who have traveled to Jamaica or elsewhere and haven't been able to get back. And in fact, one of the most horrific stories that I've heard so far was of the period during, when the Go Home vans were going around different parts of London. One mother who had young children at the time was told that she would be put into detention, even though she had been in the UK since she was 3 years old, and she didn't want the shame of being put into detention, so she voluntarily left, and but then didn't want to leave her children behind, even though they were British. So she went back to Kingston, didn't have any family there, didn't know where was a safe place to be, and her son ended up being shot and killed. So these are the kinds of stories that we find are not being covered, and are the things that we would expect the government to be responding to. But yeah, I'm going to move on to the next one. This one, the reason, Glenda Caesar, many of you will have heard of her situation in the newspapers. She was born in Dominica, and left for the UK in 1961 when she was only 3 months old. What I thought was interesting about her situation was that she started having problems with her passport relatively early on. I think, I can't remember what year, but she was working at a doctor's surgery when the people who were employing her had said that that she couldn't work there any longer because she didn't have the right documents. I think I'm conscious I'm going on very long, so I'm going to try and, I think I've got about 5 more minutes. I'm going to try and wrap up. Let me just, I'll play this one and then have this as the last recording that I play.
2009. I had been working, so to get jobs wasn't a problem for me because I had an experience in mental health. I had been working for the NHS for over, I think it was maybe 20 years. So I had reached the stage where I'm touching 50 now. So I'm saying, well, I want to sit down now. And, my kids are big. They're going to work. It's time for me to sort out, relax. So I took on I applied for a part-time job in a GP surgery, which wasn't too far away from me. And that, it was literally walking distance, and it was 4 hours a day. And the money was good. I'm not going to lie, it was good for 4 hours a day. I applied as a receptionist, but when I got there, the acting practice manager at the time said, "You're very experienced. We're looking for someone to oversee the receptionist, and we need a GP administrator. Would you take on that role?" I was like, I didn't want. I just come away from responsibility. So, okay. When she explained what I did, I said, "Yeah, I'll do it. It's only 2 receptionists I've got to oversee. I'm quite happy to do that." So that was in January 2009. I took up the position. She was just interim practice administrator. She was happy for me to take the job. Further down the line, a new practice manager came along, and he saw that I hadn't given my passport, and I was like, well, I'm in the job. You can call any of my references. They'll tell you how long I've held my positions, and what positions I've held. No, we need a passport. And I said, well, okay. So I brought my CARICOM passport in to show him where there were stamps in, where I'd travelled, where I'd been in and out of the country. But he wasn't happy with that. He wanted something to say that I had the right to work in England. So I said, well, I've got the right to work in England because I've been working all my life, And I said, I'm just sort of like semi-retired and taken this job on this way. Nope, that isn't good enough. We're going to get fined. We'll get this and we'll get that. So I said, okay, phone the Home Office. I'll wait right here for them to come and get me. And he did. He contacted the Home Office and they said, is she in the position? He said, yes. And they said, okay. But he wasn't happy with that.
And it was getting to me because it was like a continuous thing every day. He would be going on, he'd be going on. And then I think the partners agreed with him that they were fine in case they got fined because I wasn't able to work. And on the 6th of November 2009, he dismissed me from my job for gross misconduct. He actually stated in the letter, I can read it to you, the grounds upon which you have been dismissed are gross misconduct, namely any breach of a statute which directly affects your ability to carry out your duties or the characteristics of your position. This relates to your refusal or inability to produce a valid passport with a valid work permit, which is required under the Immigration, Asylum and Nationality 2006 Act. As you are a holder of a passport of the Commonwealth of Dominica, you're required to have a valid work visa. Your current passport, issued on the 25th of August 2008, does not contain a work visa. So that's why I was sacked.
Okay. So yes, I've tried to kind of select recordings that I've done that show people having experiences in different decades. One of the things I guess I mentioned as well while I'm looking at this particular screen that just got in here by accident, but is useful in that it's reminded me, the other things that we're looking at is repatriations. So having spoken to various elders in the community, somebody had said to me, oh, you know, have you looked into the Mental Health Act 1959? Because members of the community were being repatriated or kind of forcibly repatriated, deported back to different territories in the Caribbean. And so I've kind of looked into that, and it seems indeed people who were being classified as mentally ill or getting sectioned, once they had recovered from whatever their mental illness was, they were then being some, not all, a certain number were being repatriated back to Jamaica. In the belief that the sunshine would be better for their health, and so we're kind of looking at the history of that kind of behavior, getting a lot of help from people like Agri Burke, who was a psychiatrist who actually did research on people who had been sent back to Jamaica, and he went to see what had happened to them. You know, he wanted to see, and these are people who may have been in Britain 10 years, 20 years. And then he went to see what happened to them as a result of being sent back to parts of Jamaica they weren't even familiar with, on their own without their families. And in several instances, some people had committed suicide out of desperation. Some people had managed to make their way back out of Jamaica and gone to other territories like Jamaica or like Canada or the US. And then the other thing we're looking at, of course, is the fact that, you know, when we talk about the Windrush scandal, a lot of people are under the misconception that the only people who've been affected by the scandal are the Caribbean community. And although they've definitely disproportionately been affected, it's important to recognize that there are lots of other communities, you know, whether you're African or Indian, West African, those communities have also been affected, but also they were affected in the 70s and 80s as well. And in fact, I think most of the deportations that were happening around the 80s would appear at this stage to have largely affected the South Asian community. And yeah, there's lots of other sort of different things that we're thinking about, because I'm looking into a lot of the oral history archives, and listening to other recordings, kind of indications that people knew what was going on before the hostile environment was actually forced onto the political agenda, is kind of emerging. So I was listening to a recording at the Black Cultural Archives by Baroness Ross Howells, who talked about, you know, she was saying to the person that was interviewing her, she was worried because young Black Brits were being deported, even though they'd served their sentences. So what she couldn't understand was why were Black boys who were being convicted of crimes that were longer than a year or more, why, having served their sentence, they were then being repunished. and being deported to territories they often didn't even know anything about. And concurrently, at the same time, the British government was then going to Jamaica to recruit people to fight on their behalf in Afghanistan. And we see again that there are people who've served in Afghanistan for 10 years or more, well, roughly 10 years, I'd say, and then who, having expected that they would get British citizenship, are themselves struggling with having that citizenship. And this photograph here I've just included because it just shows how preposterous the whole situation was. We have this gentleman here. He came from St. Lucia, and the passport in the left-hand side of the screen shows that it's a British passport, colony of St. Lucia. And so one of the things was that if you held a passport that had been issued outside of the UK, when your country became independent, you automatically became a citizen of, say, in his case, it would have been St. Lucia. But he had actually registered as British in 1973. So you can see his British passport there on the right-hand side. And you can see it's issued in this country. You can tell just by the front cover there. Yet, when in 1983 he went to renew his passport, he was then told he wasn't British because St. Lucia had become independent in 1979. Again, this is ridiculous. He had actually paid £5 to be registered as British. He had paid £10 for the passport. I think that was roughly how much it was. I'm trying to remember the figures that he told me, but anyway, he had paid all of that, and yet they said no. And again, he was told to apply for St. Lucian citizenship. And I think what's clear is that people are being given incorrect information sometimes by the Home Office. They're certainly not being given information that would help to aid their situation. The other thing that's becoming clear in terms of the research we're doing is that immigration officers have themselves played a huge role in kind of policing the borders. So in terms of people who've tried to get back into Britain, if they've looked, suspect in any particular way, if they've looked like they might have a mental health problem, immigration officers, even though they are British passport holders, have been told that, have prevented people from coming in. So I think that, that's pretty much it on my part. I'm sure I've gone on far too long already. So I just wanted to say thank you very much for listening. And it's just been a real pleasure. And I thank Anthony and Glenda and the team and everybody for allowing me the opportunity to share my research with you thus far. So thank you.
Thank you, Juanita. That was very informative. I'm now joined by someone, Leonie Brown. To find out who Leonie Brown is, you're going to have to rejoin in 5-10 minutes because we're going to have a break. We've been going now for a couple of hours, and so for health and safety, we think we should have a break. So we'll be back at 6:05, and we have 2 more brief speakers, and then we're going to have questions and answers and have some discussion about this whole topic. We've seen that the changes in immigration law and nationality law has created harms for the African Caribbean community disproportionately. If you were here before the 1st of January 1973, you are counted as the Windrush generation. If you were here before the 31st of December 1988, you are eligible for what the government calls the Windrush scheme, that allows you to rectify your status to be given some documents. It could be citizenship, it could be indefinite leave to remain, it could be something else. The groups around the country are able to assist with that. We have a website, www.wdlegal.co.uk. You can go on there to contact us to get more information. If you know anyone that has had these experiences, that's got these issues, so that they can get support. We have law firms that will help. We have advocates that will help. So there's help out there. We are taking the initiative ourselves to raise awareness and to tackle the problem. So we ask you to have a break, and we'll come back at 6:05 to have a couple more presentations, and then we'll have questions and answers and a discussion. Thank you. So I see you at 6:15. It's already after 6. I didn't notice the time. Yeah.
Oh, my man.
Les magnifiques batongo ngai bafinga ngai mwana moto likweli ngai na nzoto papa batongo te mpona nini okomisanga enemi ya moto nyonso papa e baseka ngai bafinga ngai mwana moto balobi nakoma zoba na yo nasango te mpona nini obebisanga okomisanga enemi ya talatala ye ya nini ngai natika yo kacwa bapasi nyonso tokomona biso bonso na kati ya ndako e olingi nakoma otage ya bolingo mpona nyonso ozwwaka te bipai mosusu yo mama o yo moko oyebi ndenge nazalaka soki osali ngai likambo etumoli maso yosala ngai kala e nga nalingaka te papa o oswelanga makanisi na makambo nasali te nzambe o ngai nalobeli yo mama e olingi nakaba yo mpo nakotima ye olingi yokoka na yo na baninga bango babala te mpe mimbongo epai yoyo yo ozelaka na yo se loboko moko soki mpo na ngai tosinyela mpe toyokana kozwana ngai mama ekoma matata o mpe nasalaka topoto vivre na ndenge nyonso ekoki ye mama ezali mwa pasi mpe nasalaka maso po tozangeloko te mama eske okufaka nzala na ndako mama kozwana ngai mama ekoma matata o mpe nasalaka topoto vivre na ndenge nyonso ekoki ye kozwana ngai mama ezali mwa pasi mpe nasalaka maso po tozangeloko te mama o boluwaye boluwaye nakomi zoba boluwaye boluwaye nasala nini boluwaye boluwaye nakomi aveugle boluwaye boluwaye nasuki awa boluwaye nasali nyonso mwana mama oboyi kolimbisa ngai olingi napikola tour Eiffel mpo napesa baboti bayo Calvine boluwaye nasali nyonso tu mwana mama oboyi kolimbisa ngai olingi na bongwama nakoma mwasi mpo babenga biso baomo dikense boluwaye boluwaye mwana ya mama boluwaye boluwaye nazwi mayele boluwaye boluwaye nasinyela mpe boluwaye boluwaye ezali normal boluwaye boluwaye oh yeah Zoba boluwaye boluwaye nasala nini boluwaye boluwaye nakomi aveugle boluwaye boluwaye nasuki awa
Ngeyakithi, ngeyakithi, ngeyakithi ngoma le ngeyakithi. Ishayeni bafana bakithi. Oh lina. Ibambeni bafana bancane nje. Ishayeni ibambeni igcine. Ngeyakithi. Ishayeni bafana bakithi. Ngeyakithi. Ibambeni bafana bancane. Ishayeni ibambeni igcine. Umgido lo owakithi ekhaya ushayeni ubambeni ugcine umgido lo owakithi ekhaya ushayeni ubambeni ugcine isikicha ngesakithi isikicha ngesakithi sona sishayeni sibambeni sigcine isikicha lesakithi isikicha ngesakithi Dabesne Lama la pumalen Dabesne bo Lama la pumalen Dabesne Lama la pumalen ngoba ixabe nomakhelwane baqathaniswa yini yizo lezi zindaba amahungahunga ezimpi emhlabeni izizwe ziyavukelana ngabe wenze njani nansi inquzo yegwelutshena yegwelutshena le awu egwelutshena bo egwelutshena egwelutshena safika khona thina safika khona kwabulawa wesiphuma khona yefilaphu sesiphuma khona khona le kwande siphuma khona thina yelele ebhirijini esiphuma khona egwelutshena egwelutshena khona le khezi esiphuma khona yebulili mesiphuma khona yecholocho yelele yelupane khona le phinga siphuma khona thina khona le nkaya siphuma khona wabulawa wesiphuma khona thina yefilaphu sesiphuma khona
We haven't got any sound on the Zoom. Roland, can you unmute the mic?
There's no sound.
No sound on the Zoom. Roland, can you unmute the mic, please? Not the laptop, the mic, not the laptop, it's one of the phones that needs to be unmuted.
computer off.
Okay.
Hold on.
Hello.
Great, we can hear you now. We just need to see the main camera.
Okay.
Can you turn the video on for the main camera, Roland?
Okay. Okay, we're just setting up. Everyone set the seats.
Roland, are you going to start?
Yes. No, I'm not.
Yes.
I'm not taking part. Hold on. I've got background things to do.
We just need the camera turning on the laptop, please, Roland.
Fiona, can you hear me?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Right, this is the microphone, okay?
All is loud and clear, and we can see you and hear you.
Thank you. We're now back in our final session. Previously, we were talking about the impact that the Windrush scandal had on the Windrush generation, how the statuses have been taken away in terms of citizenship, and how immigration law had been imposed and affected people in different ways. Some lost their jobs, some were put in detention, some were deported, some were threatened with deportation, and the government has said that they will compensate people and return people's statuses. So if you were here before the 1st of January 1973, then you're considered as part of the Windrush generation. If you were here before the 31st of December 1988, you are considered eligible for the Windrush scheme, which means that if you haven't got those documents, you can apply to the scheme and they will provide those documents free of charge. You can even get your British citizenship free of charge. Usually it's about £1,300, but through the Windrush scheme, there is no charge. So it's important that people check and see whether or not they're entitled and make the applications. You can do that by contacting one of the organizations that are involved or contacting the Home Office. But we will support people who are going through that process and be advocates for them. This part of the program is really a little bit of an upbeat presentation, because before we were hearing all the negative things that have been happening, but then how did people respond? And one of those things that happened was people had difficulties with jobs. We're going to hear from Richard Davis, who works with people who have decided to go into self-employment or start their own business. So I'd like Richard to talk a little bit about what he's been doing with people from the Windrush generation.
Right. Thank you very much, Anthony. Thank you to be taking part in this discussion. I'm a community activist. I'm also a consultant. And over the years as a community activist, I've experienced the issue around inequality, around immigration. And my first experience was back in the 80s. The lady named, Asian lady named Anna Tipchak. I fully remember that situation happening. She was from Rochdale and the outskirts of Manchester, but we campaigned in the city of Manchester through the trade union when I was very active there. That was my first understanding of what classifies a hostile environment in the early stage. Moving things on further with the Windrush scandal, my first involvement was before Anthony. But within Manchester, I see the needs as a business advisor. Just what role can I play to support our community? Because at the time, there was a lot of people at a crossroad what to do. I know we put on various events, business expo and workshops, trying to get our community to give them the options from employment to self-employment. I would say I've done a reasonably good job in the sense of trying to get our community to get involved and to be engaging in space that as well as a way forward levels of work. But as a business advisor, I see in a bigger role because we need to be part of the solution, the economic solution in this country, because we're part of the UK and we are citizens, irrespective of what the government and other people want to say. And I think we strongly, we need to be seen to be actively involved in our economic position in our community and the wider economic benefit for the UK, because we have to think about also the younger generation. So I'm really happy to be on this forum just to demonstrate as someone in the community can play a role, and I think other community members can play a role from the health and well-being sector, even from the art sector. We what we seem to be part of the wide solution, whatever the issue are. I know today is about the Windrush, but I think there is a wider issues around our community needs and how we can play our role. I know as an individual, I can empower other people. I have done so successfully. You in your community can be made yourself as an influencer and also empower, use that effectively to say to a community, stop talking in the barbershop or the hairdresser, come out and make the voice be heard and be something positive for the community. The only way we can go forward and address this issue that's in the hostile community, hostile environment, we need to be involved in the community, in the politics, in the community, irrespective of your religious or not, because that's another area where some community members don't want to come forward because they say that is politics.
Could I just ask you to stop a moment? It's not totally clear on the Zoom. Roland, would you be able to put the mic a little bit closer? Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, can you hear us now?
Can you make the mic central so that it'll pick up everybody? Thank you. If you move the table into the middle. Thank you.
Yes, so I was saying that one of the biggest drive I've been doing in recent time is the word around collaboration, because based on my own experience and my own my expertise, I know a lot of those strengths and expertise available in other people like myself in the communities, but we're not able to transcend that to help other groups in other cities and towns. We know we're doing a fantastic job in Manchester, not because I live in Manchester, but because of what's coming out of the city, various projects, especially during the COVID. We have a very effective group, they can. They work locally, but they have a strong national drive about health and well-being issue. I work with that group. I'm also part of a wider group. But generally speaking, going forward, I think we can play a very important role in addressing the issue around the COVID, issue around the Windrush that you're talking about now. And I would just want to leave the final word for me at this moment is don't wait for someone to do things for you. You can do it for yourself and your wider community because you know what's happening in your community. Irrespective of what your local councillors and MP do, you can actually step up. I've done it successfully, challenged my councillor, challenged my MP, and that information went all the way to the House of Commons. So you can make a big difference in what you do locally and nationally as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. As part of this panel, we now have Leonie Brown, and it's going to be revealed who Leonie is. Because since the start of this evening, we were talking about citizens who had their citizenship taken and became immigrants. Well, Leonie is the complete reversal. She was an immigrant, but then through her tenacity and strength, she became a citizen. And we'd now like to hear Leonie's story. Leonie's also director of Windrush Defenders Legal, so she is who must be obeyed by the rest of us who are directors as well, because she actually controls all the finance. So over to you, Leonie.
Thank you, Anthony. It's my pleasure to be here to talk to you and to share my story. So, like Anthony said, I am one of the co-founders of Windrush Defenders Legal CIC, and a director there. My story began in 1992 when I came into the country. So I'm not exactly falling under the Windrush scheme. As you heard, Anthony, I've said that it's if you are here before the 31st of December 1988, then you fall under that scheme. So I came into the country in 1992 as a young woman. With my boyfriend to stay with family. And in 1993, I had my daughter, and I was given an opportunity at the time that was with the immigration. At the time they called it working holiday maker. So I was given 2 years to stay in the country, to work, to see the rest of the country, and to just have a holiday in the country. But during that time, I had my daughter, and life became a bit more serious for me and has changed for me. So I wanted to stay on and to try and give myself equip myself so that when I go back to my home country, I could take care of my daughter. I didn't intend it on wanting to stay here permanently. And I also, obviously things have changed for me. So when I go back to Jamaica, I was able to sustain myself and be in a position to look after my child. So I began studying and being a young parent and just continuing with my life, really. Unfortunately, the immigration didn't allow me to extend that 2 years, and they started to pressuring me to leave the country. At this point, my life had changed significantly. So I wanted to stay, and
Excuse
bear
me.
with me for a minute. Hello. I'm so sorry about that. There's some background noise. So anyway, losing my trail of thought. So I was threatened with deportation. This went on for about 4 years. I was being threatened with deportation. I've been asked on several occasions to leave the country within 28 days. And it was very traumatizing for me and my daughter. In those days, what immigration used to do is to go to the school and they would snatch children that were under immigration control or was in the country, what they call illegally, and then the parents would have to turn up. So, and the fear in me, I couldn't let the school know because I didn't trust anyone. I thought that they would probably call the immigration. So me and my daughter, we lived in fear for like 4 years. And then when she was 7, there was an immigration rule that kicked in that said that if a child was born in this country and lived here for 7 years, that the court would have to make a decision about their welfare. That they have rights then. And I applied. in those days as well, there were very, very limited amount of immigration support for people, unless you have a lot of money to pay lawyers. You know, there wasn't a lot of organization that was giving free immigration advice, and the one that, you know, was overwhelmed with, and there's long waiting list. So in the end, I decided to take on my own case and to do my best with it. I had a bit of support, but the lady that was supporting me didn't believe in the case. She didn't believe I had no ground of appeal. And I had to do that appeal myself. So myself and my daughter went to the tribunal, and I represented myself and turned the Home Office's intention around, and they eventually gave me indefinite leave to remain in the UK outside of the immigration rules. So yes, and this was 1999. By that time, I had started to sell out my furnitures and my stuff that I have, because I thought that this is the last straw. If they've made a decision that I can't stay in the country, then I'm gonna have to leave. So I started getting rid of my stuff. I know that I have about 2 months turnaround. I didn't want them to deport me, so I was gonna make my way home. But fortunately, you know, God was on my side. And my daughter came in her school uniform to tribunal with me, and she was singing Jesus Love is Bubbling Over, and we went into court and I stated my case. And the guy from the Home Office was in awe of my, you know, when he seen my bundle that I've put together, how my daughter had 100% attendance school record, how she was integrated into the community. Oh, I've studied, I brought all my certificates at that time, and that I never took a penny from this country, that I never lived off the state. I was working, and I was, you know, holding down my job and bringing up my child. And so, yes, they decided to give me indefinite leave to remain in the country. So that's my success story. It started out with traumatic experiences where I was threatened with deportation on several occasions. I ended up in hospital and that. But in the end, I triumphed and I got my stay. My daughter, she is 28. She's graduated from university. She's got a little boy, and she is studying again and planning to go back to university. She wants to be a midwife. So yes, so that's me basically. In 2018, when the Windrush scandal broke, well, prior to 2018, I was at university. I met Anthony. I was studying law, because I'm always studying. So I met Anthony, and in 2018, Anthony was on my course, and so we kept in touch. But when the Windrush scandal broke in 2018, I went to a meeting because I thought to myself, I might have skills that I could use to help my community. I didn't understand the enormity of it. I didn't know how widespread this was, but I went to a meeting and I met Anthony there, and Anthony said to me, listen, we have got to help the community. You know, we can't just sit back and not do anything. And that's the beginning of Windrush Defenders Legal CIC. Basically, we put out calls for lawyers and community activists and workers, and people came forward, and it's 4 years on, and I am still here supporting the Windrush generation. My advice to you, if you're out there and you've got if you fall under the Windrush scheme, come forward. We will try our very, very best to help you, maybe to get your documentations, to claim compensation. If we can't go the full way, we've got a network of organizations, law firm, and people who will be able to refer you or signpost you to for assistance. please don't stay there. Don't suffer in silence. We are here to help you. We are volunteering our time, but we want to do it because we know that unity is strength, and that when we come together, that we can move mountains. So yes, that's me basically. I know Anthony's built up an anticipation who I am. That's my great story, really. So yes, so thank you. It's my pleasure to be here with you today. And yes, I'll pass you back to Anthony.
Thank you. So we now know some of the driving forces behind Windrush Defenders, but we also know that it's a network and it's a coming together. You often hear people say, oh, the community doesn't work together. It's a lie. We do work together. It's just that we don't often show it. But this evening, we are here as a panel together, people with different skills, different focus areas, but collectively, it's really about looking at those 5 themes within Burning Work that Jerome talked about. So community cohesion, first of all, because the immigration law does tear communities apart. It takes fathers away from families and deports them and damages that community, damages that family. We also have within that theme, our community centres and our sound systems. That brings people together, that brings the community together and keeps the information, the history going and keeps the connection going. And tonight, later on, we're going to employ that again with the Raytown experience. And then we have the criminal justice theme, where we're looking at all the disparities within that, and we want to tackle those disparities, the stop and search, the excessive sentencing, the schools to prison pipeline. It's all connected. Then we have the education system, where the African Caribbean pupils are not attaining the 3 A levels they need to get to university. Only 3.5% of them are getting the 3 A levels, whereas for other communities like Chinese, it's 25%, white British, 11%, Asian community, 17%. So we need to raise those levels, or we need to look at what is going on in the schools, why we're not achieving those levels, what is going on at home, what is going on with health, nutrition, and so on and so forth, because it all is connected. Then we have the health theme. Richard has talked about CAN, Caribbean and African Health Network. We work in partnership with CAN in terms of looking at what's happening with maternal health and the disparities that's there. Prostate cancer, Black men are more likely to suffer from prostate cancer than other communities. Diabetes, similarly. We need to look at all these disparities and see why our health service is not really reducing those disparities. And then work. Richard talked about what we're doing to promote work, but also there's issues around employment and the disparities that take place there. And the Windrush Act would address all those areas. And so that's what we want to see. And people can contact us through our websites. We now open for questions. If anybody wants to ask any questions, and members of the panel will aim to give the best answer that they can. Any questions or comments from anyone? Fiona?
Just to say that you can now unmute in the chat if people want to. I'd just like to say that people on the Zoom meeting can now unmute if people have questions. I'd like to say that the whole thing has been just incredibly informative and accessible and fascinating, and we've now got this as a really brilliant resource, which is the YouTube video, which Miles is going to be able to edit to take the music and the interval out of it and have it on our website and have it there as a resource to let anybody know about it. It's just looked amazing, the whole thing. I just really like to congratulate everyone involved.
Thank you. can I just add, Fiona? I've got to say, in such a short time, how yourself, June Elizabeth, Roland, everybody's come together, the tech team, in putting this together so that we can share it on YouTube and on Zoom. So thank you for your time and your energy, and for hosting the Windrush at Crusade on Zoom and YouTube. And I'm sure everybody here really appreciates your Zoom training and look forward to the next session.
Thank you very much as well from me. Yeah. We should have had another speaker this evening, but there was a development, but they're here. I just wondered if Paul Davidson, you'd like to say a few words as to what you've heard tonight, and your thoughts as to the way we work together. Paul Davidson.
Paul, you're unmuted now. If you'd like to show your video, I can spotlight you.
In my phone. Hello.
Hello.
Sorry, Anthony. I'm just on the motorway, so it's just a bit. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not actually convenient for me to talk at the moment. I'm driving at 60 miles an hour, so I have to decline just that response for now, if you don't mind.
All right, thanks, Paul. Alison, is that you? Alison Mallett? Alison, you're
All right, I am now. Yeah, I just think it's been a really interesting session. I've learned a lot. It's made me think, and I'm just sort of really pleased that everybody on here has a story to tell, but the stories are sort of turning themselves around, if you like, and that going forward, that all of you who are saying we can help you, we can support you, and that help is out there, and more people know about it. So I want to thank you, because it's been an absolutely brilliant. I've not taken my eyes off the screen. I've not stopped listening. You know, sometimes you want to sort of do things in the background, but it's been so inspirational that I've not been able to do that today. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
June Elizabeth, as part of our Zoom crew and advocate. Your thoughts? You're muted, June.
I can't unmute.
Oh, we can hear you now.
Oh, that's better.
I've unmuted you now.
Thank you very much. Well, I just want to say, first of all, I always give God thanks that He allowed us all from different parts and roads and motorways to be able to gather together and to share the information internationally, you know, and I've got to give a big thanks to Fiona to kind of head the tech team, yes, and then to Herman and everybody that's on the tech team, and we're looking forward to some more training. But a big hand clap on the back to all the panel. All your presentations was first class. There's so many stars to give out that you have to wait till you see me. Yeah. And I would have liked to be with you physically, but due to circumstances, I'm not. Otherwise, I'd show Roland and everybody that's going to be at the Raytown experience how to drop foot tonight. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Herman so he can say a few words. Thank you very much. Have a good night. One love, yeah?
You got the foot. Herman.
He needs to be unmuted.
Yeah.
I've done that now.
Yeah, great. Yeah, it's good to be involved with
setup for today. Well done, excellent, at short notice, so that's well done. I'd like to start from what I can see from the left with Juanita. Excellent, what a scholar you are. Honestly, I could do with actually coming to some of your sort of, lessons and so forth. So I know we're going to be meeting up soon. And actually, the gentleman next to you, I believe, Jerome. I think I used to work with Jerome at the I believe the Black Cultural Archives. Yes, so it's quite interesting in Brixton. So I suppose youth is the future. So he's sticking at it and doing it. So it's good to see that there. All the best for the future, or whatever. Because I know we had some good times there when we actually were doing the triage for the Windrush clients, as it were. And I forgot the name. Leonie, yes, Leonie. Really good listening to your story. I remember around about that time, the 7-year rule. I remember when that was like a mantra, where which actually those who actually knew how to navigate, negotiate that, got through. But very inspirational. You should be taking it around nationwide as a tool, giving people talks. I really do like that. The next gentleman, your name escapes me. I'm sorry, but I like to hear with regard to you talking about the other factors like the religious groups. You talked about enterprise, a lot of the other issues, which actually, because really it's quite holistic. Very much so. Like I know, I could say, and I'm not missing out. Glenda, but very much what Anthony said. It's not a matter of just studying education. It is about basically nutrition. It is about basically health. It is about basically the environment that you're in and basically what's around you, which actually kicks you on. So, it's more than just actually just studying. So it's like what you were saying, there's other intrinsic parts, really holistic. And also, I have to come persuading us and actually keeping us on our toes and the messages and so forth. And with regard to her story and helping, it was interesting because I came involved with Windrush clients 2016. Funny enough, it's people back, employment issues and housing and welfare benefits. What's quite interesting, about 20% of the clients who were coming through. Those weren't the issues. It was immigration which was the issues because they couldn't draw their benefits. They had issues getting their pensions. Some had actually just moved residencies and basically had issues with regard to the new changes with regard to their documentation, got caught up with that. And some were just really just pushed out rather cowardly by employers with regard to the changes and the checks with regard to around the immigration. So that's how I got involved with the Windrush aspect. So we know it was happening well before what was termed in 2018 Windrush, from that point of view. But other than that, really good today, very informative. And I think actually that's going to be a really good sort of resource for the future, but make the most of it as well. Make the Home Office pay for it. That's for one thing. So use it, with funders and so forth. But well done, well put on there, especially to Glenda, Anthony, and the team up there as well. And I know Roland, and obviously, June Elizabeth and Fiona very much who's got a patience, basically. So patient, Fiona. All right, so that's all I've got to say. But I've been great. It's been great being involved. Yeah, so keep it up. Yeah, and I love the flag in the background. Looks great. Where is there? We need to see more of that. I've never seen that in London. Need to get one down here. Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Okay, thank you, Herman. Miles, I don't know if you can hear us. Can you give us your take on today and what you see as the way to get our...
I don't think Miles is there.
Miles is watching on the YouTube thing, so...
Okay.
Shazza's there.
Shazza? Your summary?
I think that's it, I think. Yeah.
Spot on. Okay. So we think we've come to the end of the contributions. It just leaves me to say that we can see that there are quite a number of difficulties that people have experienced, but also there are a number of triumphs that people have experienced. And by sharing those, we've become more aware and we become a collective And this is where the umbrella of the Windrush Act is quite strategic. Before, the government has been able to keep these individual cases under the radar, and people would suffer in silence. But now with this umbrella and connecting all these cases and showing how it's the law that is actually impacting on people's lives, and what changes we want in the law to protect ourselves and our future generations, that is our crusade. And so that is the challenge that we bring to Parliament, because it's Parliament that makes the laws. The government has always told us, until there is an act of Parliament, Parliament hasn't spoken. Parliament can only speak when there's an act. Yet they tell us there's been an apology. I don't see an act of Parliament that says there is an apology. Only Parliament can apologise, because it was Parliament that made the law. Parliament passed an act that took away people's citizenship. Parliament passed an act that required people to produce documents before they could access the NHS that they had been invited here to create. Only Parliament can apologise. So the Windrush Act would first of all get Parliament to apologise to its citizens for how they've been unjustly treated. Then it would restore the citizenship of the Windrush generation and their descendants, enable them to register and not naturalise. It would then tackle the disparities in community cohesion, in criminal justice, in education, in health, and in work. That is the concept of the Windrush Act. We don't go into detail because that's what our MPs are for. They would have helped the details between them and the Lords. They will come up with the Act. But the broad themes is what we are asking them to tackle. And we're asking people to contact their MPs and ask them, you know, when they come around knocking on your door for your vote, tell them that you want to see a Windrush Act. And they will then act because they say that they're there. So remember, if you know of anyone who's having these difficulties, we as a community are taking the initiative to address these issues ourselves. We're doing it voluntarily. We're not asking for any payment. Because in my case, when I was threatened with deportation, the community rallied around. In other people's cases, they got support. We're just putting back what we have received, and through that we'll become a stronger community. So thank you for joining us this evening. But before we go,
we're going to talk the Crusade. What is the Crusade? Where we're going next? What happens after tonight? What's the Crusade?
So the Crusade is going to go from city to city.
And if you want it to come to your city?
If you want it to come to your city, then email the Windrush Act
at WD Legal.
At WD Legal, and you know we will connect with you. So without further ado, thank you for joining us. Thank you for listening, and don't forget, spread the word and get your friends and neighbours involved and aware of the Windrush Act Crusade. Thank you.
Thank you.